Hello, my name's Amy Lightfoot and we're here at the Teacher Educator Conference in Hyderabad, and I have with me Elka Todeva, who's one of our speakers, supported to be here by the US government through the Regional English Language Office. Elka, it was really interesting to hear your talk just now about paradigms of enrichment for language and teacher education. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about some of the themes that you picked up on. So the first thing I wanted to know is you talked a bit about different types of competence. Could you say a little bit more about that?
First of all, I want to share that I just came out of my session and I feel so energized because I had the most wonderful audience. First time in India for me, so you never know when you have not experienced a particular audience. They were the best people to have around, so that was very great. And it was part of my talk about the shifting realities of the world we live in, and also these shifting realities, they determine our new objectives. And I was commenting how for years we as language teachers, we were shooting for what Swain and Cannell and Swain and others have been calling communicative competence, developing communicative competence in the learners as a four-dimensional kind of entity, our knowledge of the syntax and morphology of a particular language, our sense of what is socially appropriate, the way we package things on the discourse level, and also the fourth dimension of us having what they call a strategic competence. In other words, our ability to compensate for any possible gaps in our learning. Nowadays, because of these new realities that I mentioned earlier, people like Claire Cramsh and others have been talking about a very critical ability to shift and navigate between languages. And Claire Cramsh calls this a symbolic competence, that code switching ability and navigating between languages and dialect. And she makes the case, and I think this is supported by a number of other studies. My own book co-author with Yosone Senas, where we interviewed a lot of multilinguals and they contributed with their personal narratives. It's more important for us to be code switching, and a lot of people are using translanguaging as a term, because in this way we get much better transactional results, and also we build better relationships. Kanagaraju is somebody who is very well known in this part of the world and around the world. He has been talking about developing performance competence. In other words, our ability to use every single semiotic resource that we have as a result of our prior linguistic and cultural experiences.
Great. Some of our viewers, they might be familiar with the term code switching, and I'm just wondering how code switching and translanguaging relate, the two terms. Are they similar?
Very similar. I mean, there is a lot of overlap. For years we have been talking about code switching. Now translanguaging is maybe because it's such a translanguage. There is something very dynamic about the term that I like, and also in my talk I also talked about grammaring as a kind of a teaching philosophy where grammar stops being a term and a noun that's kind of dead, and very often for a lot of people grammar being associated with structures and rules, and a lot of people shying away with grammaring has this dynamic element, rhymes with water surveying, paragliding. So to me, translanguaging is one of these terms where it captures not only these new realities and the dynamic relationships, but the nature of the interactions.
Yeah, because it sounds much more fluid somehow, doesn't it? Translanguaging compared
to me,
code
definitely.
Switching,
yes. Code switching is like it's kind of you have these separations that I always find a little problematic, because it's a lot more fluid, because you can have a sentence in English in a conversation and you throw in a word in a language that's shared by the two interlocutors. So to me that's a nice way to capture the difference.
You also talked a little bit about the labels that we give to different concepts in different languages, and how that can change the way that we view the things that we're describing. Can you say a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, this was actually one of the points I was trying to make in our talk, that the metaphors and the narratives we live by, to use the metaphors we live by, that's the George Lakoff, a very well-known book from the 80s, they really do impact about the way we think about things. And I gave the examples how for years we were using computer metaphors, thinking of learning and teaching in terms of input and output, and that's too mechanistic. Very often that devalues the role of the learner, and also in a way it diminishes the social aspect of communication and learning, while nowadays we prefer, instead of talking about input, to talk about affordances. We're talking about more ecological approaches to teaching. Instead of practice and drills, we have started talking about iteration. Iteration is a term that we have borrowed from physics, and the difference is with iteration, there is repetition, but it's not always the same. There's always a new twist, either form or content-wise. And in my talk, I gave the example of something that a lot of people have done in their classrooms, where you ask students to work in groups, usually in concentric circles, and they share the same story, but they do it the first time they have 3 minutes, and then 2 minutes, and then 1. And each time they shift and they have a new person that they're talking to. So there are two variables. The first is the time component, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1. And then each time we have a new person that we are talking to. And so in a way we're sharing exactly the same story, but things are never the same, because the first time around usually people try to figure out what to share. The second time around, when I talk to people, they say how their second sharing is a lot more streamlined, because they've already had a chance to get the message out. And very often, depending on who people are talking to, that also brings about certain changes, because if you have somebody that has read the same book you're talking about, then we can really cut corners and share things in very different ways than if you have somebody from a different culture with a different linguistic background. Then we have to fill in a lot of, just flesh things out, provide a lot more detail. So that's why the difference between, and to me it's such a fascinating thing, it's, practice and drills, there is repetition and things are predictable. With the iteration, there's always something new, there's a new element, and that's very nice and refreshing for the learners, but it's also nice for us as teachers, because there is, we are hearing different things in the classroom.
Great. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come and speak to me. And if you haven't watched Elka's talk already, please do go ahead and watch it on the website. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here. Thank you.